All right, I'm clicking record because Patrick and I were already talking about the Rimbaud biography that he's rereading right now, and I wanted to follow up right away and ask, but I feel like this should be in the thing. So yeah. So what are you rereading right now?
Yeah, there's a couple biographies that I kind of want to maybe not reread the whole things, but parts to remember, kind of how differently people thought about Rimbaud.
Yeah.
Reading some, getting back into the poetry and the letters again. It's When I was making the movie, I dive into a lot writing it. Then I sort of stayed away while making it.
Okay.
And then now that a little time has gone past, I've forgotten a lot of it, I think.
Yeah.
And now that there's going to be some very studious Rimbaud scholars coming in and
Oh,
enthusiasts,
cool.
and I
Yeah.
want to have a good conversation with them.
That'll be great. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm excited. Yeah, so this we're talking about his movie coming out, the Arthur Rimbaud movie on the 12th that I'll be there for, and we're gonna have a little get together after with this discussion. So that's it's very immersive. It's very like highbrow. This is such thoughtful, I'm excited for this day. I just feel like it's, I'll do some reading before too. There's a lot of people that, I really am deeply influenced by, like Richard Hell and Tom Verlaine and Patti Smith and people like that who, I'm sure your thought plane has crossed theirs in I know nothing of the film on purpose. I'm going in completely cold, but I'm excited to have this intellectual exercise. It's rare to have so much to think about with
Yeah,
the movie.
it's what's wonderful about Rimbaud is, it is intellectual. He did know, he was such a learned person, and it's like you read
Yeah.
his letters, and half his letters are he's just demanding books, and he
Wow.
read about everything, not just literature, but he loved history, he loved science. He was in later in his life, he was demanding books about like gun manufacturing and artisanal wells, and he wanted to know it all.
Wow.
And but at the same time, he was questioning and kind of bringing it all down at the same time. And I think that that's what keeps it from being too highbrow and too. It's sort of it is very hungry for the world and wants to know a lot. At the same time, he has a wonderful sense of humor, a wonderful sense of irreverence, and I think that that's what keeps it very, very interesting. What has appealed to a lot of people about Rambo.
Right. What was your introduction?
I can't quite remember, but I can tell you, I've had that a book of his poetry on the shelf for like 20 years, and I had tried over the years, and it just wasn't quite for me at the moment. It didn't really, I didn't really connect with it for many times, and I finally went back to it and started at the very beginning because I always started with people talk about a season in hell and illumination, and I thought, oh, I'll start with those that I've heard of. But it helped me starting from the beginning
Hmm.
because he was one of those people who had the education, like you basically recreate your whole art form when you learn it. So, he was writing Latin, he read the Greek poets, and he kind of worked in the forms of French tradition and then slowly broke out of them. And so you start there, and then especially when you hear his letters, he's just so fully human in his
Mm.
letters, as opposed to some symbol or avatar for kind of rebelliousness or some concept.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember. I was probably in college. Like when I had my moment of realizing it was the punks that,
Yeah,
like the people, that was what my entry point was. And I would have gobbled up a few, if, I don't know what. I'm sure it's like behind yours are behind you. Mine are on the other side of the camera. I have a whole wall, and I'm sure there's a few of his books just, from 20 whatever years ago. But I haven't read him. As you're talking, I'm like, oh, I got to do a dive again. Like I have to do exactly what you're doing because I want to come in with a little bit of vocabulary. I only have sort of the feelings and the sensation
hmm
of all the associations, which have, gone for 20 more years of my personal, artistic exploration and education. But he's definitely someone who I recognize. what do you call it? Like it's sort of one of these like structural artists who we don't always recognize where they are in our understanding of our 101, but there's all of this that he did. So like I'm associating an idea with someone else, someone more contemporary perhaps,
Right.
but I know that he probably originated a lot of that. So that it's like watching a movie from 1939 and realizing like, oh, that was the template for this thing that now became a trope, you know? So I want to like refamiliarize myself with like what the tropes are that I have embedded in here without realizing that
Yeah.
they're associated with him.
I mean, that's definitely what I had. I had a lot of tropes, and I think that it's nice to know that, I'm well into middle age and there is a lot there for someone. Usually in generalizing, you know, the French seem to have much more of a lifelong relationship with Rimbaud.
Okay.
Whereas I find like a lot of English speaking readers, Rimbaud is the poet of their youth, and then they kind of
Hmm.
move on to other things at later times. Patti Smith being a notable exception.
Right.
Um, but it's nice to know that this symbol of youth and rebelliousness, it's like there's a lot in there for you at a later stage in life. And maybe you see it very differently. And especially you see his later life very differently when you yourself are older.
Hmm. So have you recognized anything, any of those um evolutions of thought that, ideas that maybe 20 years ago meant something else to you and now in this last few years of immersion in the topic, like that you see it differently at this age?
I don't think just because I didn't get too deep into it, or like I said, it was a book on the shelf. Like I'm sure everybody has books on their shelves that you try at one point, and you're just not
Yeah.
ready for whatever reason to
Yeah.
connect with. And there's even technical things that I wasn't quite ready for. So I did the translations of the poems and the letters, and I had starting in the pandemic started doing a lot of translation of first it was Russian, German, and Polish poets, and they were all sort of formal writers. And I sort of slowly learned the different types of meters and poetic forms. And I think I needed all that as practice to be prepared for a lot of Rimbaud's early poems are in Alexandrines. And it's a very French form. It's 12 syllables. The line is in two halves. And there's other various rules at different points in French history. But you can understand it conceptually, but to like feel what it's like to hear an Alexandrian, especially for it to be spoken in the film, I feel like I needed 20 years to prepare for that. To go through iambic pentameter in verse
Yeah.
drama, then to go through these other forms, and I'm like, I'm finally ready. I think to really appreciate the Alexandrian.
Hmm. I honestly, yeah, I have no, if
It
I
sounds
ever knew what it
very
was, I don't
technical, but
today.
it's sort of,
Yeah.
but like all technical things, when you're using it to support something else, a performance, a flow. So you can see like, 12 syllables is a little longer than the usual English line of verse. But if it's split in half, it can have this kind of like back and forth to it. And especially
Yeah.
when you get into something, a poem like The Drunken Boat, that kind of flow and that half to it, it just feels right. And
Sure.
it gives it a kind of momentum. So it's technical at its core, but it's for another purpose that I think we see in the movie.
The Drunken Boat.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna pull it up so I read later. Cool.
It is it's wonderful. It's written out along this wall. It's engraved into this long wall um, in this uh, in this area in Paris, supposedly from one of the cafes. I think the idea is it's from a cafe that he frequented, and it's almost like this kind of smoke or something emanating from
Mm,
the cafe. But he
that's very
wrote it
cool.
right before the trip. I believe it was right before the trip to Paris, where he came to meet Verlaine.
Wow. Okay.
And there's a significant movie history of Rimbaud too,
Yeah.
in a number of films, um, some of which I want to see, but I haven't been able to see. I think
Like which ones?
There's, I think, the Australian television station in, I want to say, maybe the 80s had one of their first teleplays they did. Um, Original teleplays was about Rimbaud and Verlaine, and which was very unusual for that time to actually explicitly talk about the relationship. Um, the bigger ones, some of the Rimbaud fans may know there was the Total Eclipse with,
Total Eclipse. Yeah.
and then there was Terence
Season of
Stamp.
Hell.
Terence
Okay.
Stamp played Rimbaud also in this French-Italian co-production.
I'm looking at like some, yeah, and then A Season in Hell.
Hmm.
Um, I'm looking at some references. Cool. So what brought you to the idea to make your version?
Well, part of it came from a negative place in that I had just seen a film that had one actor, and I was really upset at how unimaginative this film was. It basically just showed up, and there was just one actor and nothing else. And to me, it feels like if you're doing something like having just one actor, you need to do more work to
Mhm.
keep the elements flowing to help that sort of structural, um, not really limitation, but it is a kind of limitation. You're tying your hands in some ways, and so I feel like you need to think harder about all the other elements. And I started thinking, well, who could actually merit, interesting enough to merit a film and carry the interest of a film as one character. And the thing about Rimbaud is, there were so many elements to his life. I'm about to talk about his loneliness, but
Sure.
I don't want to make it seem like he was always alone. He was with many people, he had many friends, and he was often described, especially later in his life, as just a very good-natured person that got along with a lot of people, which is not usually the picture people have of Rimbaud. But there was at core a kind of loneliness, and I think it's a loneliness that a lot of artists will be familiar with. And because of that, it kind of felt right to have him as the one actor in this.
Mhm.
And there are other types of interaction in the way we sort of connect with other people, but maybe never truly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm. That makes total sense. Okay. And then what was this production like? Because it was not, as you talked about the other day, we did an event the other day um, about a few different topics, coming from journalism into distribution into like practical examples of films coming out, and Patrick was one of them. And you showed your, you joked about like your single still, like Killers of the Flower Moon. And then you kind of like exploratory lectured with us about what the image evokes and why and how and led us on a little bit of a discussion thread there before getting into a topic that I think we'll talk about in a few minutes. But um, yeah, talk to me about the approach, which again I know very little because I'm going in cold on purpose on Tuesday, but I understand the staging was not traditional. Yeah.
yeah, and from that, I'll try to spoil as little as possible for you.
Okay.
So yeah, the stage is it looks a little bit like, and some people said this on Wednesday. It's like, oh, it's a little like a theater set where you just have pieces of the set, and part of that is true, and part of that you can understand with the topic. So if you think about how the still we have is Rimbaud sort of in the sitting room, and it's if he were describing that sitting room, what a poet would do is they would pick up on certain details. And so that is what brings the room into relief. And they don't say everything about the room, but you kind of imagine the rest. And so in some ways, the picture of the film is that kind of flexibility and that kind of targeting of poetic details. And so it's a fun game, but it also uh, kind of puts a wrench into everything.
Okay.
And so you kind of have to reimagine everything because like suddenly, how do I light this? And this is a little of what I went into the other day. I won't go into as much detail, but you have to rethink all those things.
Hmm.
And I remember you talk about what the production was like. It was exhausting, but in the best way. I remember this one time, we had this extremely complicated shot, and we had been worried about it for weeks, and we pulled it off. And I have never seen my DP so elated.
Oh,
And then the first AD called the next shot, and you just saw blood drain from his face, where you just realize I have to invent a whole new shot
oh,
again. But it's great. It's an invitation, right? To like completely take nothing for granted. It's like every shot you have to reimagine what it could be.
hmm.
Um, and we had a great shoot in that because it's one actor, he had to live through the end of the film. And so we couldn't shoot that long of a day. And so we kept it to a true 10-hour day. The shooting was about 8 hours or so. And it gave us enough time to sleep to really have our brains charged because it was exhausting in terms of imagination every day, all the things we had to solve with it. But it's exactly what you want,
Yeah.
So it was very, very satisfactory in that way. And we shot in Winnipeg, on a stage in Winnipeg, and it was just the perfect place to be. I've always loved the artists I've met from Winnipeg. And at first, what seemed like a real problem, which was that Winnipeg has become very popular for shooting because of tax credits. And so there were a lot of huge films. It's actually the busiest Winnipeg had ever been was when we were there. And we were worried about crew, just because these big productions were gobbling everybody up and paying them huge amounts of money. But in the end, and I'm sure you had experience like this, is that it actually was great because it meant the people who wanted to be there really chose to. They turned down
Sure.
lucrative jobs, and this was something they really chose to do.
Yeah.
And that completely changed the production. It's like, how every production usually have like a hero or two. It was just like left, right, everywhere you looked, they were heroes. And everywhere you looked also was a good 70-80% of my crew, I think, were directors.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
and I think that apparently that's just something that happens in Winnipeg. Everybody, there's a really wonderful independent streak, and everybody creates things.
Hmm. That's Guy Madden, right? His town?
That's Guide Manstown, yes.
I wonder if that has anything to do with it.
I think it does have something to do with it, but it's also he's part of a kind of what made him is also something he gave back. There is a pretty rich history of
Right.
filmmakers there, and I think that they're trying to expand on that. So like, and Guy has done his part in that his
Of course.
co-directors, and who are also the producers of his films, and they were producers of this film. He sort of brought them into his film orbit with the idea that they're going to expand and start doing more of their own projects.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so now you're getting into distribution. And was that when you were building the movie, were you thinking about distribution at that point, or like the sort of game plan? And I want you to just like, tell us how you're doing this and start talking about the presentation that you made the other day. But was that something that was devised from the beginning, or was that something that you kind of iterated on and reacted to the situation?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a reaction. There are hopes you have at the beginning. But as you know, the world has its own things to say about what's going to happen and what's possible. And I think the shape for all my moves, I was hoping this would be different just because it was so exciting for me in terms of the elements that are new. There's always been some, I hope, a little innovation here and there in my other films, but this one it just exploded with it. And I thought it was so exciting to us making it. I thought, oh, it's going to be so exciting to the world. And the same thing happened that has happened with all my other films, which is sort of this year of waiting, and rejection from the key festivals. And it's sort of at the end of that is when you got to put your thinking cap on and say, okay,
Yeah.
what's possible now? And as I was thinking about that, we talked a little about this Wednesday, and boy, could I empathize with how your sense of exhaustion as to what it takes to put out
You
your
know,
own film.
it's funny. I realized that after that um so normally I am this gigantic cheerleader for the whole thing, like for like the art and the abilities and the promise of the future and all that stuff. Normally, I'm so rah rah, sincerely, not out of an exercise, not artificially. What I realized I was doing the other day, that like if someone hadn't heard me talk about these topics before, I was kind of in my brain, I was doing two things. One, I was speaking in a continuum. I wasn't like introducing something and then countering it.
Right.
I was just giving the other. And also, I do recognize that there was a basis for the whole conversation in that contradiction of like all the speculative fiction of Substack, honestly, like of like the Non-Day and Film Stack and whatever, of these people that, because I've said it, I'm not like I'm very critical of this stuff. Like I think it's wonderful that it exists, but it's like a misnomer. It's a displacement of what the reality is. When I was in college in film school, I would do the same thing. I would write a paper and like 1 to 7 people would read it.
Yeah.
And that was the right amount of people to read that paper. The fact that, and so these people are doing the same thing, but they're like broadcasting it as if they are, professionals and as if they should be perceived. And, I didn't have that expectation that I should be perceived. And I did not have that expectation that what my foundational ideas as a burgeoning, as a young person figuring out the world, they were not meant to be like, built into anything. They were me just formulating thoughts and making them more and more articulate to make
Yeah.
them more and more corporeal. That's not what this like film stack and current, independent film ecosystem is doing. What it is instead is it's just giving everyone the access to be able to broadcast themselves and to, everyone who's got an idea thinks that their idea needs to be a movie that plays in movie theaters. Like I use that reference of like the record store in comparison to Spotify. And I say to people, like in a record store, there were like a few hundred records back in
Right.
the day before there was Spotify. So you had a few hundred, like if a person's way of getting music was the record store, there were a few hundred options at a time. And that's it. That is still the same reality that we live in today in the music industry. People
Mm.
still predominantly listen to 99.9% go to a few hundred artists. That's how 99% of the listens go. There are niches and stuff that people go seek out, but it is like 1,000 people most of the time, or less, fewer.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about all of these things, like um there's too many ideas that are out there. Like there's too many movies that are getting, so there's all these people that are complaining about that their film doesn't have distribution outlets and stuff. Back in the day, they would not have had film stock to film on. So they would not have gotten to the point where they're mad that a distributor doesn't want to buy them. They wouldn't have shot the movie, so
Yeah.
the conversation that you are having, an experienced and like validated filmmaker versus what a lot of these people are having. So what I was trying to do was create a contrast between your challenges versus like the guy writing an essay. I don't mean specifically the people on stage. I mean more like people who were not on stage the other day. I think the
Yeah.
people who were on stage were good, like do productive work. But there's a lot of people who project themselves as having the same, validation as you, and they don't. And they're talking about their challenges, but it's like they're not supposed to be even at there's no realm where they're supposed to achieve those things. They have not, the ingredients are not there. They have not baked their thing. It's undercooked, So I
It,
wanted to draw those comparisons, and I
yeah.
realized I came out much more critical than constructive, because I was just reducing and then letting you talk.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, those are very complicated ideas that I don't know that I've thought about enough to be able to add anything to, except that it's just always very complicated inside and out, right?
Yeah.
Like inside, you also don't know where you fit into the continuum.
Hmm.
And the world is
Of
giving you
course.
the world is giving you clues, and you got to figure out when to accept them and when not to. And I think like that's every artist struggles with that.
Yeah.
Um, just to try to be honest,
Yeah.
and then also be honest with what is possible.
Right.
And I think when we were talking about the release, and I was impressed the number of people you could get into your opening weeks. I've never been able to get anybody near an audience near that, but it's just
Yeah,
the
that's
idea.
what I was like, sorry to interrupt you, but like what you were referring to just now, the exhaustion. That's
Yeah,
what I was trying to say to people. Everyone's like, well, we can just do this. And it's like, yo, no, no. That first of all, the amount of work that we like that I have this case study to point to, the amount of work, but also I can't replicate that. Like you people definitely can't, but I can't even. We
yeah,
had a perfect situation and we did a tremendous amount of work.
yeah,
So these people, like some of the, just to, for the listener, like people were raising their hands and they're saying, you guys should do this, you should do that. And I was replying to them, I was like, do you have someone to write those emails? That's like 30 emails right there for this one opportunity. And we need to do that like 75 more times. Do you have someone who could help me with that? Because I won't have the ability to write,
yeah.
700
Well,
emails.
I want to come back to that because
Yeah.
that is something that the type of solution we've landed on, or at least the type of experiment we've landed on, really does help with.
Hmm.
But kind of taking it one step back is just that this idea of doing what you were talking about, the exhaustion, the amount of effort for what amounts to, a very dedicated but kind of token audience and symbols. Wonderful that people will write about it and there'll be reviews, but it's sort of not what you do, and like you want people in theaters and having that experience. It's so narrow who actually gets to have that,
Uh-huh.
including among the writers, the people who write about it, write critiques. They don't get that theatrical
Yeah,
experience. They
yeah.
don't get to experience with other people. And so it was just such a depressing vision of the future. It's like if that is sort of the plan of last resort. And I think we had a small distributor screening where we almost by accident invited a couple outsiders, complete outsiders, didn't know anything about the film, didn't had no connection to anybody who made the film. And they were just youngish artists in New York, and they just exploded in their reaction to the movie.
Mm.
And it reminded me of who is in New York,
Yeah.
and who are, and why I am in New York, and what and the audience that is available here. And so I thought of this idea of, taking away some of that intensity of trying to do everything at once, especially the impossibility of trying to find this audience at once, because it can only be deeply manufactured.
Hmm.
Sometimes that manufacturing is from a lot of money in a machine, or it's from you bit by bit, but doing a ton of it, to get those
Yeah.
people in the door. And so I thought, okay, let's slow it down. What if we were screening instead of, 20, 30 times a week, just once a week? Suddenly, like all the stress levels fall in some ways, just because you're like, okay, 1 week, pretty much most people who live here, you can fill the theater for one week, um, and possibly 2 weeks, if you're and then suddenly you have those 2 weeks, it's like, okay, then it's to the third screening, you have these couple weeks of people hearing about it and words starting to circulate. And I thought, could this be just a much more sane, a kind of better use of resources too? You're not taking up a whole theater for all these screenings that, for my films in the past, they've been pretty empty for most of the screenings. And so it just seems like a better use of resources. It doesn't you're not pushing as much. So it's up to you. But in our version of this, we're not spending on a publicist. We're not spending on marketing. We're letting it be organic. Just if people hear about it and are interested, and that's actually been really great because even though we kind of go through the same process of if we're doing, a piece of press, we go through the same steps, but just not having a hard deadline and nobody pushing for it, the conversation just feels better. It just feels a little more
Sure.
human.
Sure.
Um, and it lets us do things like you were just talking about, like a last minute things comes up and I can fit it in because,
Yeah.
this isn't the huge press week and then I don't have, a dozen screenings I need to be at. It's
Right.
easy to adapt and roll in these things, which, um, so many things you don't know about. People suggest things when we were on Wednesday. So many people suggested excellent things.
Yeah.
And I have the time and capacity because we're only
Good.
doing this once a week that I can actually digest that and see what comes of it.
So how do you find out? Like you say you screen it once, you sell that out, and then you grow some word of mouth. How do you find out if it's working, what's working, how much it's working, and what to do accordingly?
Very, very good questions that I don't have the answers to yet, but I have some idea of what's going to
Okay.
give me the answers. So I think one thing is when we have this screening, you're very kind to host a little reception and discussion, and that will give us a lot of information. I'm hoping a lot of people will stay, even people who aren't huge fans of because I want to hear what their experience. And I think like that will tell us who are the people that it really reached, who are the most enthusiastic, and maybe help us find more of them.
Right.
There is a question also. I mentioned this on Wednesday too. Is that we have this vision of just runaway hits, right? And just like people run out of the theater and love it, and they're going to tell everybody.
Yeah.
And the question for me in a town as big as New York, that has a population as big, but sensibilities as broad ranging, how much of a minority taste or audience, I don't know how minority this is or how niche or if it's going to appeal to everybody. I have no idea. But if it is something that is more specialized in its audience, it can still survive, and
Yeah.
so, it's sort of, I feel like if we can continue with something close to like half a house every week, um, it can sustain. Uh, and I think it's not a completely low bar, but it's reasonable compared to other bars for sustaining a presence in New York.
Right. I mean, it's cool. It's pretty much like what, we said it the other day when we were up there talking together. Like, my thesis for Reunion's role as like I never wanted Reunion to be, I wanted Reunion to be more exhibitor than distributor, if anything. And I have not ever like fully mobilized that, just simply from a bandwidth perspective. Like I just never, but if I were to, it would basically be what you're talking about. It would not be that I pick up a movie and we, like mount a big campaign. It would more be like, no, let's get a couple, let's get a friends and family, let's do a tastemaker, let's do a public, one with an afters and make, eventize the cinematic experience. Like do it only as events. And then if it picks up from there, partner, get
Yeah.
someone else to go do the other 100 theaters that we will continue to stay engaged with and lending energy toward. But that is I mean, yeah, that's my already kind of yours as a movie, mine as like a company or a brand.
Right.
That's basically what I do is instead of saying, like when I do a play, for example, instead of squeezing all the juice out of the play, I'm just like, we're just going to do one night. It's going to be great. We're going to work with the best people that I won't otherwise have access to for more than that night. We're going to get a great venue because I'm going to take it on a Sunday. We're going to have a huge capacity. It's going to be a big room because it's going to be all charged around this one moment. And then we're going to do another thing later. And that's
Yeah.
it. Rather than saying how many, houses can I fill out of this one, I'm just like, I'm gonna come up with more and more ideas. So the reunion from the beginning, whenever I considered being a distributor or an exhibitor, it was always what you're describing of like, I'll do this movie as many times as will fill the room,
Yeah.
and
I'm
that's
I'm
it.
curious. I'm curious as you've done that. Have you? One thing that impressed me about the people I talked to is it was a really wide-ranging crowd. And have you felt like that diversity kind of grow as you've done this?
It's very practical. It is. I was interviewed last week on Kinema, and they actually used this basically what I'm about. The way I'm gonna give you the same, mechanic, and they made that kind of like the headline of the article that I don't market. I don't promote. I build my audience about 30 people at a time. And I say 30 because I think the average person, sort of like you said, like people in New York City, they could fill 100, 200 seats, for their movie. The average person can get 30 people to come to a cool thing they're doing. Their movie opening, they get more. But
Yeah.
like if it's like my movie is screening or I'm performing, I'm acting in a piece or something like that, they get like 30 people. You
Mhm.
can do more, but it takes some effort. But like the average social person who's cool, who's doing like who's well respected creatively, it's like 30 people. And that's a good number. That's a lot. And I build the night filled with like 10, there's like 5 to 10 people that are getting 30 people to go.
Mhm.
And that's the audience. So it's inherently diverse in that sense because I'm never I said it the other day, like I didn't send an email blast about the um the show you were a part of. It's only word of mouth. So I have emails to send. I don't use it that much. It goes to 50,000 people and I rarely send those emails. This was exclusively recirculated to the people who went to a magazine launch I did last month. It was on the Instagram, it was in the WhatsApp, it was in like the engaged groups,
Yeah.
and then it was recirculated to people very, very recently, and that's it. And the rest of it is you, Lucy and Delilah, NB, Adam, Mike, Alex, and it's their friends and the people they told about. And I
Yeah.
want it to be that. I want that diversity. I always tell people I'd rather the room be full of Patrick's people than mine because I want to see who Patrick's people are.
Yeah. Well, it made me think of what is sort of the long-term goal of a run like this, which is, all the old-time distributors, when they're talking about running something for 3 or 4 months before it found its legs, that finding its legs is basically meaning that it breaks out of the specialty boxes you might think are the interested parties to start with,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like, God bless them, cinephiles are paying attention and they will generally move pretty fast. And I love that about how dedicated people are in New York. And then you want to, as we talked about on Wednesday, move beyond those groups. And then there's others, there's the literary world for this particular film, many other kind of groups that you might naturally be interested in this. But then you want to move beyond that as well.
Hmm.
And all of those, beyond the cinephiles, generally you're getting into groups that say may not traffic the Roxy that often. And that's just good in general
Yeah.
for the culture. But so it's sort of like it's good for your film as it finds. That's in my mind what finding your legs is like.
Hmm.
It's sort of like getting people to walk a new path to your movie, and it's good for just movies in general.
I mean, I would like you should think about all of those different connections and like there should be some, I don't know, talk to Patty Smith and her daughter and like get them to host something, get Richard Hell to do a talk with you. Like he's around, he's in that East
Yeah.
Village apartment still. He just did a piece on Godlike on his new, not the new edition of
Yes, the
his
release
book.
of his Rimbaud themed book.
Exactly, yes. So like he should totally host something,
Yeah.
stuff like that, and then you get these different audiences, and then they start to connect.
And what's great about that is, well, what's great about this release format is that if we were opening the movie, I would have to have all those set, right?
Hmm.
It's sort of like you have to have your partners lined up, you have to have your events lined up. Whereas at this point, what I can do is all of the people I want to partner with, I can invite them to have that same experience of seeing the movie.
Yeah.
And sort of like with press, it's just very like, is this, something you want to do? Is this something you get excited about? And then there's still time to implement all these things. And in some ways, it's again, because the bar is very different, it almost feels good to have this flow of things later as
Hmm.
well that kind of emerge from this, because you can't spend it all at the beginning. It's nice to have just a flow of press, a flow of people who come in and want to host an event around it. I hope it
Yeah.
will. We talked a little about this before, but like so many people have so many views on Rambo, and even though obviously I'm very attached to mine, I'm hoping that this will lead to other conversations, broader conversations of Rambo, and others people's picture of Rambo can also enter the conversation.
Yes. I want to send it to Richard Hell if he doesn't already know about it. I'm just thinking about that right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to NYRB, and I we're looking for a way around it. I think he may be have trouble with hearing in the theater, so we'll see if
Mhm.
we can work around that. See if figure out. But even uh, if not, just talking together, it's
Yeah.
just two beautifully different um, visions and invocations of Rambo that
He's
would
aware
be
of.
yes,
Okay, good.
yeah,
All right. 'Cause he's awesome. Yeah. Because he would love it. Yeah, he would love it. So cool. All right. Well, I'm really excited for Tuesday. I think that we're going to learn a lot, and I love this idea of this, engaged thought exercise around a movie. It's a really beautiful thing to think about. Like I'm right now today, I'm going to go see a double feature they're doing at Moving Image of Battle of Algiers and Cachet, and I'm going with my French Algerian friend, and it's not the same as what we're talking about, but it's like we're gonna talk about it. She's gonna tell me she's writing a book about her grandparents and stuff, and like
um,
she's really engaged in the topic, and I'm so excited to do this double feature with a couple friends, but also like one person who's like really engaged in the topic.
yeah.
And we have an hour in between, and we're gonna like really talk about it. And so on Tuesday, similarly, I'm really excited for what you prepare for us with not only the film, but the whole evening, the whole experience. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that I can absolutely guarantee that the discussion will be very interesting. There's a
Yeah.
lot to talk about. Um, it's very interesting to see what people will pick up on. There's so many
Uh-huh.
available elements of the film to focus on,
Yeah.
including one that doesn't stand out as much. There's a lot of kind of like technically new things and what you can think of as film innovations, but at the end of it, I feel the weight of a life. I'm quite not sure how it happens. It's not just tracing out events of a life. I feel like I've lived a life.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's one of the very special elements of the movie. And I'm curious if people are going to feel that and then what that does to you.
Yeah.
Like, how does that actually impact you to feel the whole of a life, and especially a life like this?
All right. I'm excited to find out. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. And yeah, again, I'm very excited for Tuesday. And I think that it's worth people. I'm intent. I didn't go on the because I feel like it would take us off. I wanted this to really be about the movie on Tuesday, but to extrapolate for the future, maybe a part two is like what Patrick has suggested about New York City and the government partnerships and mayor's office and commissioner and art houses and stuff like that. But Patrick is very he's thinking about where movies and New York City fit together in the cultural conversation. And so experiments like Tuesday are going to be very telling, and I'm really honored and excited to be a part of it. And thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay.
We're gonna have an interesting conversation on Tuesday.
I hope to see some of y'all there, and to be continued. All right, man. Here, I'm gonna stop this. Hold on. Wait, how do I stop the recording? I don't know how to stop recording. I think I just have to close it. Oh, there we go.